Welcome to Bon Voyage Besties, everyone's favorite travel and friendship podcast hosted by Rachel and Rosa. Today, it's just the two of us, but we're going to be diving into a juicy topic, which is traveling with high maintenance friends and how to deal with it. Because honestly, I think we've all been there. So we're super excited to dish out advice. And yeah, let's just get started and dive right into it. So, Rosa, what do you think high maintenance even means in the context of travel? Because we hear it thrown around all the time, but specifically with travel, what do you think it means?
So first off, I want to say if you're part of a group of friends and you don't know who's the high maintenance friend, then that might be you.
Yeah, totally. Because I think sometimes with me and my group of friends, they'll never say anything. So it could very well be me because I know when it comes to travel in particular, I am high maintenance about certain things and I already know that about myself. So, for example, being high maintenance, it could be somebody who packs the itinerary and is an over planner. That is me, girl. I come up with a spreadsheet beforehand. I do all the hotel reservations right away. I book the flights right away. I book the activities immediately. And then I put together a little itinerary, either in an Excel sheet or a Google Doc. And my one friend who I went to Barcelona with, who I love, she's one of my best friends. I actually talked about her on the episode we did with Leah about long distance friendship. She told me, she was just like, Rachel, this is too much. Why do you have a spreadsheet for our week in Barcelona? And it was because I wanted to make sure I saw everything. So in that scenario, I was definitely the high maintenance friend.
That could be me too. I think it depends on the destination and the scenario. I'm usually pretty relaxed and low key when I travel with a group of friends. I know when I travel as a family with my partner and daughter, I'm a little bit more type A and more rigid. I'm just like you. I'll have like a full blown itinerary. I even include like, hey, bathroom break at 3 o'clock. I could be very specific. So at least for me, it could be a combination of a lot of things. Like you said, somebody who kind of creates a very rigid itinerary. You also have those that are like picky eaters that would only eat at certain places. And it's a little bit different when someone has dietary restrictions. That's completely understandable that they want to be a little bit strict about, where they eat. But you have those people that are like, unless it's like a 5-star, Michelin star restaurant, I'm not going to eat there. Whereas for me, I can either eat from like a street vendor or spend like $200 on a steak over in freaking Thailand for like 2 ounces. So it really depends on your style. And then also another thing too, I consider high maintenance is, those travel friends that are constantly complaining. And that can be a little bit of a downer, especially when you're on a getaway with some friends.
Yeah, totally. So with the constant complainers, it drives me insane. As some of you already know, if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, I'm a teacher. I teach high school. So I'm very used to de-escalating complaints in teenagers and keeping them mellow, keeping them calm. So when I'm on vacation, the last thing I want to deal with are complaints from adults. I find with that, I have a lot less patience because I'm like, you're 30, 40 years old. You should know better than to complain at every little thing, because with travel, things go wrong. Things can go haywire, whether it's canceled flights or a late bus, or maybe something with the reservation gets lost in the shuffle, and you do need to be able to roll with the punches a little bit. So the constant complaining does get to me. Now, I will say the only time when this is good is if, say, there's a mess up with the hotel or something that actually does need to be addressed. I can be a people pleaser and avoid conflict. So sometimes it's good to have that Karen friend who will say something and get the problem fixed, because that's not me.
That could be me. They always joke around. They're like, oh, here comes Rosa. And I'm like, well, don't mess with me and my reservations, I will complain if something does go wrong that it's outside of my control. Or even like there's been times I remember I traveled with a friend once to Dominican Republic, and the resort where we were staying in, they just upgraded their system to like these new key cards. And our room was like a 10-minute walk from the lobby, and our key card kept on messing up. We had to walk back to the lobby, get a new key card, go back to the room. And on one occasion, we did that like 3 times. And at that point, I was like annoyed. And I know the person at the front desk, it wasn't their fault. There's a new system, technology glitches, but it was annoying. And it got to the point that I said to them, I was like, listen, this is a huge inconvenience. We were constantly walking back and forth, taking away from our time relaxing at the beach or the pool. Like, you guys have to do something. And then they upgraded us to like a suite with like an ocean view. So I was like, okay. So that worked out to our benefit. So in that scenario, complaining was necessary and it got us an upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds awesome. Like sometimes it is worth speaking up. And to go back to the point about food, I will admit I'm a bit of a foodie. I guess I am that high maintenance friend. But with me, I can eat like at, a food truck or a Michelin star restaurant. My main thing is the reviews have to be good. So I do check reviews in advance and make sure that the food quality is good because, and it's the same with you, we both work full time. And I like making sure I'm getting value for my money, especially now that eating out has gotten so expensive, especially after the pandemic. I want to make sure that the food quality is actually good. So if I'm with friends and they want to stop somewhere that has horrible reviews, I am that person who's like, hey, maybe we should go to the next restaurant.
Me too, because, I travel frequently. My friends designate me as the planner of the trip, which I don't mind because I'm the same way. It doesn't necessarily have to be, Michelin star restaurant for me as long as it's good quality, good reviews. So knowing that ahead of time, I'm always like searching for restaurants, places to eat and have like a list compiled because I never want to be hangry because then that's not fun. And I've been there where we're just like roaming around. I remember this happened to us. We were, I think, in Italy or something, and we wanted to wing it. And we're walking around, and all of the places that we were finding didn't have good reviews. And it was getting to the point that I had told Michael and Samantha, I was like, one of you guys just pick the freaking place. I don't care what we eat because at this point, it's hot. I'm getting annoyed. So I always like to do research beforehand when it comes to places to eat. And again, if you have a friend that has dietary constraints, being mindful of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we all understand like dietary restrictions as well as say if somebody has sensory issues with eating certain food, totally get that. Where I get a little frustrated is like you said, if there's a lack of planning and there's nothing to eat. This has happened to me countless times in Spain or Italy. I'll be with friends and we'll do sightseeing and then it'll be like at that weird time in Spain or Italy where the kitchen's closed, but they don't reopen again till like 7 o'clock at night and there's really nothing available. And that can be a little frustrating. And this also happened to me in Osaka, but luckily I was traveling by myself, so nobody had to suffer. I went to the botanical gardens that Team Labs has in Osaka, and they're only open at night because it's an outdoor experience and it's all lit up and it's beautiful. But I was in a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with. This was my second week in Japan. I was starving, and there was a McDonald's right there. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to check out a Japanese McDonald's. And it was awesome. I had a samurai burger. It was very good. So it was one of those moments where I was like, you know what? I'm going to do what I got to do. I'm going to rock up to McDonald's. McDonald's delivered. McDonald's delivered.
Especially international. That's one of the things we actually like to do. We like to go to McDonald's in different destinations just to check out like their local menu and different things that you wouldn't find back in the States.
Yeah, I love McDonald's overseas. And it's one of those places too, not to like go on a detour here with the content of the podcast, but it's one of those places too where you'll get a meal. Like when they're open, they're open. There's no surprises there. If you're traveling solo, you don't have to worry about finding a seat at the bar. You're going to get fed. So McDonald's has definitely come in handy multiple times. And it is cool to see the menu internationally. I don't think there's any chain that does localization quite like McDonald's. It's pretty awesome. So I never mind rocking into McDonald's. Not for every meal, but when I need it in a pinch, it's always there. Those beautiful golden arches. It also happened to me when we went to Versailles in France, and it was a rainy day and it came out of nowhere. And this girl I met at the hostel and we were like running and running and we were exhausted and we were wet and cold. This was in November and we just see McDonald's like at the end of the street. Thank God we can get our macaroons at McDonald's, dry off. It was perfect.
So there you go, McDonald's. Add that to your itinerary for any destination.
Please sponsor us, McDonald's. We're really cool.
Exactly. But I've also had situations where I've traveled with friends. And again, I don't mind when I personally travel. I usually set like a budget for like hotels, stuff like that. But when it comes to food, I feel like that's one of the most important things when I'm traveling is experiencing the local cuisine. So I'm a little bit more flexible and I don't mind splurging if it's a good meal. But I've traveled with friends that, they go to places that are like, because they see it on Instagram and social media and it looks pretty, but the quality of the food is not great. So being mindful of that, and I feel like that could be a little bit more on the high maintenance side just because it looks pretty. doesn't necessarily mean that the food is going to be good. And now you're, splurging. It happened to us in Florida. We went to like this beach club in Miami, and I think I ended up spending like $150 for like brunch, which was insane because I ate like
That's
waffles and eggs.
ridiculous.
Yeah. But my friend that I was traveling with, she was really sad that she wanted to go to this place. And I was like, okay, same like you, trying to be a people pleaser. I was like, sure, let's do it. And when we got there and, we took a cab there. So once we got there and they're like, yeah, the cover charge was like $100, plus gratuity and all these things. So at the end of the day, our bill was $150 for brunch. And at that point, it was my fault too, because I didn't look it up beforehand. I just kind of went with it. But never did I expect I was going to be spending $150. I thought maybe like, 60, $70, which is still a lot for eggs and waffles. But
My
I was like,
God.
we have a nice view of the ocean. So when you're traveling with people, especially when they're a little bit more high maintenance than you are, it does take, I feel like, a lot of pre-planning. And I think the red flags are there. So like, I know for me, again, when I travel with certain friends, I kind of know where we are, like financially, what their styles are like too. So I think kind of recognizing that before you go on a trip is really important, because then that allows you to kind of set boundaries. And I think those are the most important things when you are traveling with these high maintenance friends, is the planning process to avoid conflict, because nobody wants to be arguing while they're on vacation.
No, the planning process is super key. Like if you have a friend, because something else that tends to be lumped in with high maintenance when it comes to travel are these friends who they only want to stay at luxury accommodations. And I know on Instagram and TikTok, there's a lot of funny reels about like, oh, we're not just sleeping in the room. Like I need to have all the bells and whistles. I want a spa on site. I want a pool. I want a king bed with a balcony. And that's just not in everyone's budget. Like I would like to be all White Lotus and staying at the Four Seasons every night too, but it's so important to have those conversations at ahead of time, because if you have that one friend who refuses to stay anywhere less than 5 stars, it can definitely be problematic, especially if you just can't afford that. I know that I'm joking about my credit card a lot on this podcast, but I'm not putting 5,000 on my card for the Four Seasons. I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely not. And I think the red flags are there too, right? Like if you have friends that you're planning a trip with, and maybe this is the first time you're traveling with them, as a group, see how they behave back home, because that's a real indication of most likely how they're going to be. If not, they're probably going to be worse when you guys are away on vacation. I have friends that I've gone out to for like brunch, and they're like super picky, constantly complaining about something. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I personally can never travel with you, because, when you're traveling, like you said, things go wrong all the time and you kind of have to adjust. And like, don't get me wrong, there's times that I've had some travel fails where I sit there and cry or get upset and like pout. But, you gotta get over it, find a solution. So seeing the red flags back home should be an indication that this person's probably going to behave this way when you guys travel as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like, your friends best, see how they act at home, and don't assume that because they're a certain way at home that they're going to be the same on the road. Like, if they're that friend who complains about everything and maybe is a little mean to the wait staff at restaurants. What if they're mean to the wait staff? Maybe you shouldn't be friends with them, but that's a whole other
That's a whole other
conversation.
story.
But yeah, that's a whole other story. But if you see these behaviors at home, they're not going to change on the road, and you're spending a lot of money to go and travel. So if you know that someone may be a good friend but not a good travel partner, you really do need to think about that. With that being said, have you ever been blindsided by a travel companion's quirk? Because there's also those people who may be really relaxed and chill at home, but when they get on the road, that anxiety kicks in and they turn into a completely different person.
Oh, yeah. And again, I've
Spill
also
the
been
tea.
I've also been that person.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm gonna actually complain about my own family.
Oh, go for it. We're all friends here.
Michael, Samantha, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
We apologize.
When we travel as a family, it could be difficult. We're three adults trying to get ready, usually sharing one bathroom. And back home, both Michael and Samantha tend to take forever. But when we travel, it's even worse. And I'm just like, my gosh, we have places to go, things to do, like hurry up. So it kind of frustrates me a little bit. And it's not that I'm blindsided by it, because like I said, back home, they tend to be the same. So we kind of have to set times. Like if we know we have to be out of the door, let's say like at 9 o'clock in the morning, I tell Michael, like, You're first, 6 o'clock, put your alarm. You got to get ready because it'll take him like 2 hours sometimes to get ready and go out the door. And I'm like, I know you have fabulous hair, but buddy, come on.
Yeah, that's happened to me too with friends. I won't name names, but I've had multiple friends actually where we'll have reservations or we'll have to catch a train and they'll be like, "Oh, I want to change my outfit," or "Oh, I need to do my hair." And it's like, "No, no, no, we don't have time for this." Like, the trains are not going to care about how you look. They are running on a schedule. We gotta leave. So it's the
Ex-
same thing, being like, make sure you're up early. But at the same time, I don't want to be a parent to fully grown adults. So it's always so tricky.
Yeah, that's always hard. I mean, for me, when I travel with Michael and Samantha, it's different because I can boss them around.
I love
when
that
I
for you.
when I travel with friends, obviously I'm not gonna be like, "Hey, Rachel, hurry up," you know. So it's a little bit different and complicated. But again, it's like you know this person, right, on kind of like your day to day, so you kind of understand and know that before you travel with them. But I had this one friend who she's always very well like put together, very polished. And I remember we traveled somewhere and we were staying like an Airbnb for a couple of days, and she had her stuff everywhere. And it was driving me freaking nuts. Like she was so messy. And then the Airbnb only had one bathroom. Her stuff was everywhere. After she would, brush her teeth or do whatever she was doing, she was leaving a mess in the sink, like water everywhere.
Ew.
And I'm like cleaning up after her. And this was the first time her and I had traveled together. And again, back home, she's always very put together, very clean and organized. So traveling that one time, I was like, what the heck? Is this person like this like all the time? And I try to be mindful when I'm traveling with people, especially when we have shared spaces, not to have my stuff everywhere and like, just kind of be mindful of that. But it was driving me nuts after the second day. I was like having all of her stuff. I was like, I'm just gonna put your stuff right here. And like organized it like nicely and put it to like the side because I was like, if I have to walk in and trip over your shoes one more time, I'm gonna lose my itch.
My God. And
Yeah.
it's so crazy to me because I'm the opposite. So my apartment, I'll have it cleaned and all if people are coming over, but when it's just me and the foster cats, it looks like an 18-year-old boy lives here. Like I have laundry everywhere, clutter. Like right now I have dishes sitting in the sink that I have to do. I have a whole thing of laundry. I have to vacuum. But when I'm, like you said, in a shared space with a friend, or when I used to stay at hostels, I was so particular about keeping my stuff all together. I remember one time I was on a trip in Ireland, and it was the first time that I was staying in a mixed dorm with guys and girls. So girls, I can be a little more relaxed, but guys, I'm like, I don't want all these guys to think I'm a total pig. So I was very fussy about keeping my stuff very orderly because that would drive me insane too, just having my stuff everywhere or friends' stuff everywhere. So I totally, totally understand. So on that note, are there any particular traits in a friend that it's like immediate red flag and you wouldn't travel with them?
I mean, I guess for me, it would be someone who's a constant complainer and also it's kind of hard. I don't want to sound like a jerk, but financially, we kind of have to be sort of at the same level because I don't want to be penny pinching throughout the whole entire trip. And, later on, we'll also share some tips about how to plan accordingly to kind of minimize any issues when you're traveling with high maintenance friends. But I feel like if you're, not in the same kind of budget that I'm in, then that's going to make things a little bit more difficult because I'm fine with being flexible, but there are some things I won't compromise on. So like for me, like I'm not going to stay like in a motel off the side of the road where I think I'm going to get murdered just to save money on
Norman
accommodation.
Bates is coming for you.
Like I'm not spending, $700 a night at the Four Seasons either, but I'm not gonna kind of put myself in a predicament where I'm kind of unsafe or like the place is unsanitary just to save money. So if someone financially cannot afford the trip, then that's something for me that is kind of a bit of a red flag, and I probably wouldn't go on the trip with them.
Absolutely. And it's not that we're being mean because it goes both ways, right? Like I can't exactly go on a trip, say if my whole group of friends, they don't, but let's say if they did, they worked in finance or were making like $500,000 a year. Like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to hang out at the Ritz Carlton unless you want to pay for me, then sure, I will do whatever you want. But, like, in that case, I can't afford it, so I'm not gonna go, but it, like, happens vice versa too. Like, I'm a teacher, I'm not exactly bringing in a ton of dough, but I'm also not going to worry about spending $10 on a cab if it's pouring rain and the alternative is walking 2 miles. If I have a travel buddy like that who's every single penny just, like, counting, I can't do it. It would drive me insane, especially because I do like to splurge every so often to create memories, and if that's not your budget style, then maybe we shouldn't travel together. And it's not a bad thing, like, there's someone for everyone, but it's just not gonna work.
Exactly, yeah. So I feel like knowing what your non-negotiables are, that's definitely key because like you said, you're going on vacation, you're spending, all this money. I know at least for me, when I go away with my friends specifically, that's time that I'm not spending with my family. So if I'm gonna go away with someone and I'm gonna have a miserable time, then I'm gonna be pretty pissed off because one is taking away time that I'm spending back home with my family, and two, I'm using my PTO and money to go away somewhere and it's not even enjoyable. So understanding what your non-negotiables are and the deal breakers. So I know at least like for me, like I said, financially, you want to make sure that you guys are kind of at the same page. And like you said, Rachel, like I also have friends that they make a ton of more money than I do. And they're, staying in these luxury accommodations. And I'm just like, yeah, nope, not me. Like I like to, stay in nice places, but I always set a budget beforehand. And I think that's one of the main things when traveling with friends, especially if you are traveling with someone that's a little bit more on the high maintenance side, is setting realistic budget expectations. So like I know when I travel with friends, specifically, depending on where we're traveling from, like I know when I traveled with my one friend that lives in Europe, we're obviously traveling from two different locations. Back home in New Jersey, she's over in Europe. So our flight costs was going to be a little bit more different. But we kind of set a budget beforehand, like, hey, this is how much we're willing to spend on a hotel throughout the whole week that we're going to be at this destination. And based on that budget, then we looked for accommodations that fit that. So we were both, agreeable, like, okay, this is the maximum amount of money that we're able to spend. Similar to what you and I did when we went over to Florida, we set a budget and then we looked for accommodations based on that. And both her and I kind of looked at things and found a location that we really liked that fit within that budget. So already at least we know that the accommodations is something that we both pick and that we both can afford. So that kind of alleviates at least that part of the headache when you're traveling with someone.
Yeah, for real. Like, it's always good to talk about the budget ahead of time. And I get it. Like, talking about money can be uncomfortable. I personally don't care, but I know it can be uncomfortable for certain people. But you need to have those conversations in order to avoid surprises. I'm doing a French trip to Greece and we looked at the hotels. And for me, I'm like, if we're sharing a room, max like $300, and it worked because Greece, there's a lot of reasonable accommodation. We were able to find something right away. But it's important to have those conversations. And I do think with me, like the budget thing is a big red flag. But I have to say, the number one red flag for me would be complainers, like people who complain constantly, especially if you're going overseas and they're constantly complaining about like how different it is compared to back home. Like, I honestly like don't want to hear it. Like, we're traveling to get out of our comfort zones. Like, I really don't care that we do things differently in the United States. I just don't want to listen to it.
And that's a big one too, because especially when you're traveling outside of the US, the cultural norms can be different. I know, for instance, when I went to Greece last year, we were sitting in a restaurant in Athens and everyone was like smoking cigarettes and it was getting on my nerves. My eyes were getting like watery and dry. And it was a very like unpleasant atmosphere in that moment. But that's culturally, that's normal in Greece. You walk around a lot of the restaurants in Athens and people are smoking. So understanding that sometimes things can be different. And I'm not going to sit there and complain and tell people, hey, stop smoking when it's something that culturally is accepted and allowed. Versus back home, you don't really see that. A lot of restaurants restrict smoking indoors and even sometimes outdoors. They'll have like designated spaces for that. But understanding that things are going to be different. And like you said, you're not going to sit there and complain. That happened to us like on the first day. And whenever we were looking for restaurants, I always try to make sure to like say like indoors versus outdoor just to avoid that scenario. So you have to be able to be flexible and maneuver as opposed to sitting there just complaining the whole time that you hate it here because of X, Y, and Z. you're not going to enjoy your trip and you're just going to make it miserable for everyone else in your group.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And like you said, like I'm not going to get into a fight with somebody because they're smoking or whatever. I'm not ending up on locked up abroad. I'm sorry. I'm not confronting random strangers. Like of course you can try to look for somewhere where there's less smokers, but it is true in some destinations it's hard and it's just a cultural thing and complaining isn't going to change it. I get it. Like it's bad for you. It can trigger asthma and all kinds of horrible things. But I mean, what do you do in that situation? Like, I don't really know if there's much you can do logically unless you just want to get room service in your hotel room. I just don't know what the answer to that is.
And like it was fine. Like in a lot of places, like I said, some areas were a little bit more, I guess, like heavier with like the cafes and outdoor. But the location we were at specifically was a lot of like sports bars. So a lot of people were watching the soccer game, which was pretty cool. Like everybody's hanging out at nighttime in the plaza, watching the game, having a beer, smoking a cigarette. So it was fun. But, meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to enjoy my dinner. So I was a little kind of like, this is really not my scene. It wasn't like that everywhere that we went, but being flexible and making, knowing that you kind of have to adjust to the cultural norms. And I've had other scenarios like when I went to, I think it was Egypt. Like, culturally, I don't know if just like a thing, or maybe because like Michael was like, the man in the group, everyone would always just ask him. Like, we would go to a restaurant and be like, oh, you guys ready to order? And they would just stare at him. So Samantha and I were like, okay, so I guess we have to tell you everything we want and you, tell them. So the first time I was kind of like a little annoyed because I was like, wait a minute, like I have a voice, I can speak for myself and order my own food. But then I'm like, maybe just a cultural thing. Maybe they just, out of respect, rather deal with the man in the group than not. I remember complaining to Michael, and Michael goes like, "It's really not that big of a deal, Rosa." And I'm like, "Yeah, but like, I'm the one paying. Take my damn order."
Yeah, it's tough because like some things just star you emotionally, but at the same time, making a scene isn't going to change anything. It's so hard. Like, I guess in those situations, you just complain when you get back to the room.
Yeah. And trust me, I've had plenty of moments where I've been there and I've been that high maintenance friend, or like I'm just like, listen, I don't feel like walking, I'm tired, it is hot, we're just gonna take a taxi back to the hotel room, or whatever the case is, even if it's more money, even if the hotel would have been like a 20-minute walk. But I can be high maintenance too, so I recognize that. And I think kind of recognizing also to your travel style kind of allows you to be a little bit like more flexible when you are traveling with others, because we all have our flaws too.
Absolutely. Like, yourself best. Like I said, like I'm the one to admit, like, yeah, I'm a little rigid with planning. And I know that about myself. So if you know that you have these qualities, maybe try to like work on them a bit and be like more flexible. Cause I know we talked on another episode. It's always good to just be down for everything, within reason. And when you're traveling, it's a chance to get outside your comfort zone a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. So speaking of high maintenance friends, something that I fortunately haven't run into is whenever I find I need space from friends traveling, because it's happened. Like when you spend a lot of time together, it's just normal that you'll start getting on each other's nerves, even if it's something totally innocent. Have you ever had to tell a friend, like, I need my space, I need to go and do my own thing for a while, and then come back together later in the day? Because I know I've had to do this. There was a time when United canceled my flight, and I know I talked about this, and we were delayed 3 days, and the friend I was traveling with was understandably upset. So I decided to take a walk to the park and regroup, because if we were going to be like talking about it in the room and fuming, like things could have ended not pleasantly. So have you ever had to do that?
Thankfully not, but I've had situations where, so as a content creator, I have traveled with some friends that are not content creators, and they just, went with me as a plus one. So, they understand that while I'm doing the trip, I'm also creating content. So maybe there are parts of our itinerary where I do kind of have to do like my own thing. And I think it's important too, because sometimes when you are traveling with friends, even though you're probably going to share a lot of interests, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that you might not have in common. So, like, for instance, maybe you like going to art museums and your friend likes to sleep in. So, that's a good compromise. Like, hey, I really want to go to this art museum. So, I'm going to go by myself, which I don't mind doing. And that way you can sleep in a little bit on such day. Afterwards, we can regroup, meet up for lunch, continue our day. So, understanding the things that you like. And if your friend doesn't like them, don't force them to do it. But also, don't be that friend who gets pissed off if your friend does go on their own. You share different interests. So why would you be mad? They don't have to be glued to you the entire trip. Like, yeah, granted, like, you guys are going together because you want to spend time together. Doesn't mean like every second of the trip has to be, all of you side by side. So I think it's important too that even if you are traveling as a group to kind of have alone time. When I travel with like my partner and daughter, even though we love each other, after like 3 or 4 days being cooped up in like a tiny little room, we'll get on each other's nerves sometimes. So it is nice to kind of like decompress and do your own thing. Thankfully, I haven't been in a situation where somebody has pissed me off that I had to like kind of walk away from them.
Yeah, definitely. It's never been like to the extent where I've had to like take a whole day by myself or anything. But luckily with my friends, even if it gets to the point where we're kind of getting on each other's nerves a little bit, we're all really good about understanding that we don't have to be glued to the hip 24/7. Like I've never had a situation where, say, if I went on my own to do some shopping and somebody else went on their own to maybe do a walking tour or something, that we've been pissed at each other. And I think it's good to find those friends who are not overly clingy, because I know this is a little, maybe it's the same thing as high maintenance, it falls under that umbrella. But if you have a super clingy friend who just cannot be on their own for 5 seconds, I personally feel like that's a recipe for disaster when traveling, because it's going to happen. Even if it's like your bestie and you love that person and you're in tight quarters, you're in a new place that's unfamiliar and that causes stress, and you may get on each other's nerves and need a break. And if that friend is like not allowing you any space, like things could take a turn for the worse and like even ruin the friendship. So it's important to travel with people who understand that, you may need a little bit of space during the trip, and then that's okay.
Yeah. And I know it's hard too because, when you are traveling with someone, you don't necessarily want to be like, hey, I kind of want to do my own thing for like a little bit. But if you are traveling with someone and you don't feel comfortable that you can have these type of conversations, maybe this is really not the travel partner for you. Because if you are traveling with friends, you should be understanding of each other's needs and be respectful of each other's needs as well. So if you are traveling as a group and you don't feel like you can actually have like an honest conversation with someone, then I think that's also kind of like a red flag. I know a couple of years ago, Michael, Samantha, and I went to Spain, and my friend Michelle met up with us in Spain as well. So we were doing like this really cool live music event at one of the museums. And Michael and Samantha are huge soccer fans. And my friend Michelle was like, this is kind of boring. Like, I want to go and watch the soccer game. And Michael goes like, yeah, me too. And they both looked at me and Samantha and they're like, yeah, we kind of don't want to be here. And I was like, yeah, no problem. So the two of them went to go watch the game. Samantha and I stood listening to the rest of the performance. Her and I went to dinner. And then afterwards we met up, and it was funny because Michael was like, you sure you're not mad? And I'm like, I swear, like, I'm really not. Like, I don't want to force you to do something that you're not enjoying, where you can do something else that, gonna make you happier. So by like all means, I know you guys are gonna be fine. We'll reconvene right afterwards. I wasn't upset that they didn't want to do this one activity that I wanted to do. So being understanding when someone wants to do something else and not giving shit about it, I think is also important.
Yeah, 1000%. And it's a good quality to have in a travel partner. And like you said, it has to be somebody who you're comfortable talking to. Like if you're scared to say like, hey, I may want my own time to do this activity, then that may not be the person to travel with, because like more seriously, like you're in a different country, and what if somebody gets sick and you can't even have a basic conversation about having like separate time? If something serious actually happens, that doesn't bode well.
And it could be hard too. Like we both said, we're both not very confrontational unless
I
we kind
know.
of need to be a little bit more outspoken. So I know I've gone on trips like my one friend for her 30th birthday, there was like 10 of us and we all went to New Orleans. But she was so good because she had like a very like detailed itinerary. So it didn't really leave much room for us to kind of like argue about things to do because she already kind of had everything pre-planned beforehand, which was great. So I think when you travel also with like a large group, I think it can be a little bit difficult. I know, at least from my experience, I don't know if you've ever dealt with this where you've gone on a group trip and you kind of want to say something, but you don't feel like you can say something. So that can also be a little bit challenging.
For sure. So this is slightly a bit of a different topic. When I was in my 20s, I did a G Adventures tour, and it was a camping trip through British Columbia and Alberta, and it was beautiful. Like, it's a spectacular area. Banff National Park is one of the most stunning places I've ever been to. But basically, you have this big group and you're a bunch of strangers. So it's not like you're friends beforehand. So you never quite know who you're going to get in the group. And one of the girls on the group, she was very young. A lot of us were in our late 20s, early 30s. So we're a little more mature. I think this girl may have been like 19, 20. So she was a lot younger. And she sort of went into the trip thinking that it was a more active style trip. So G Adventures, they have different tours that appeal to different styles of travel. I think this one was just like a young person's camping trip, whereas they had other trips that were actually labeled active, and there was a lot less hiking than she thought there was going to be. So she complained about it constantly. And then there was one night where I forget the specifics behind it, but we had to wait for a boat to pick us up because they were picking up the other group first, because we would have to sometimes split the groups to do different activities. So we're waiting, and it was a beautiful night. There was a nice sunset, and this girl just would not shut up. So finally, one of the other girls in the group said something like, "Hey, look, there's nothing we can do about it. Complaining isn't going to make this boat come faster. It's a beautiful night, and you just need to chill out." And I'm so glad that she said something, because I was like feeling really awkward about it, because I'm just like, she's so young. I don't want to be a witch and come down on her. I was so glad somebody else said something, because this trip, it was a 14-day trip. And I think this was like day 10. So by day 10 of this, people were just done.
Yeah, I would be kind of like over it too after after a day or two of listening to someone constantly complain about something. But it's difficult, navigating those things. So I think it's important for you to kind of vet even if this is a friend that you've had for years, when you travel together, it's like a whole another story.
So different.
I
So
remember when the first time I went to Greece, I went with two of my friends and we got really sick. All the three of us got food poisoning. We were together for like a week and a half. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong on that trip. And we joke around because when we got to the airport back at Newark, like the three of us just like kind of split. We were like, all right, bye. And just like
yeah, as somebody's dealing with me like barfing and crapping all over the room, I don't know if they want to see me again. Like, okay, they're like, we know everything at you. We will see you later.
No, we were miserable. Like, so many things went wrong on that trip. And this is another thing, a little off topic, but it's so funny. This is when I first started doing content creation and like posting on social media. When I got back home, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, Greece looked amazing. You had the time of your life." I was like, hell no. Hell no. I was throwing up. You know what it took for me to even get that one photo? So social media sometimes does not really portray what goes on. And it's funny because this was back in 2017. And I'm still very, very good friends with two of my friends. I love them. They're like two of my best friends. But during that trip, I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. Like, we're not going to be friends again.
My gosh.
Because we were just so miserable. And we were like, it was not a fun trip. The bulk of the trip, like I said, because we got really bad food poisoning, we were just like, we were cranky and we couldn't eat. So like, it was not fun. And I remember thinking when we got back home and we like parted ways, I was like, yep. Never gonna see the two of them ever again. There goes our friendship.
My gosh, that's terrible. Yeah, I would be so embarrassed if I was traveling with you or other friends of mine and I was puking the whole time. I would be like, oh my God, they would need a major break from me.
No,
that's just the worst. Like food poisoning, you just feel awful. It's like I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, especially like if you don't know the friends that well and you're sharing a bathroom. Like, oh my God, I have nightmares just thinking about it.
Yeah, it was bad. Not only did we only have one bathroom, we got sick when we were in Santorini, where we were staying in a really cool hotel with no ventilation because it was a cave. So that was not fun. That was not fun. We didn't leave the room. And it was so funny because the owner of the hotel, he was so cute. We called in because our hotel room came with breakfast every morning that they would bring to your room. And we had like a little outdoor like balcony where you can step out. And he was like, we called in and we're like, listen, just bring us bread and water or like saltine crackers. And he's like, oh, fun night. And we're like, no, we've been freaking throwing up
We're
for the last
sick.
24 hours.
We're
Meanwhile, the
sick.
guy thinks that we're like out like partying, raging when we're not. You know, things do happen when you are on vacation and different destinations, and navigating those things could be a little bit difficult. Like I said, I'm very fortunate. I'm still very, very good friends with my two friends, even after that miserable trip. But now we're like, yeah, we're never going to Greece again together because that might break our friendship.
Yeah. And like on a similar note, Rosa, so let's say, theoretically, you've had kind of a rough trip. One of the friends was high maintenance and it really put a major damper on the trip. Let's say somehow they want to travel again. How do you politely decline? Because this is where I always have problems, again, being such a people pleaser. I'll just like take forever to answer back with my text and do like what they call on dating apps the slow fade and not actually confront people and say no. Advice on that.
I mean, just ghost them. Just kidding. It's hard because I guess my advice, I personally haven't had the scenario where I've had like a really bad time with someone to the point that I don't want to travel with them again. I've had a couple of negative experiences and then I kind of know like, okay, this isn't necessarily someone that I would on a vacation with. But I think having an open conversation and, letting them know if this is someone that you want to continue traveling, maybe this was just like a one-off thing. Going back to our trip to Greece, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. It was outside of our control. We were just miserable. We were tired. We were hungry. So I wouldn't necessarily be like, okay, I'm never traveling with these two people ever again because of this trip, because a lot of things that happened were outside of our control. But if there are things that you feel like can be worked on and you do want to continue this relationship with that friend, I think having an open conversation, like saying like, hey, I would love to travel with you again, but we like different things. So maybe on the next vacation, this is what we can do, and kind of talk about those type of things. Or maybe if it's from a financial aspect, be like, hey, I really enjoyed our time. However, I ended up spending a little bit more money than I wanted to. Maybe for the next trip, it could be a little bit more conscious and have those conversations. But I feel like if you don't feel you can have these conversations, then just tell the person no. Like, you're unfortunately not available. You would like to, if you kind of want to keep the friendship without kind of going too deep and like opening that door, then just lie.
Yeah. Luckily,
Yeah,
the
busy.
school calendar protects me a lot of the times with that, because I've had instances where it's people who I don't necessarily want to travel with and they can only go outside of summer. So I'm just like, perfect, because saying I have to work, that's not even really an excuse. It's the reality. I have to work. I can't be taking off 2 weeks in the middle of the school year. So that's certainly come in handy. But like you said, like an open conversation is good. And also remembering that some things are just out of your control. Like with that trip to Spain with United canceling our flight and having to wait 3 days, like anybody would be a little on edge. It wasn't exactly something that we were doing to each other. It was United Airlines that was doing it. So our next trip to France, like everything went great, super smooth. We met up with my friend and we're planning a trip to Greece together and it's going to be fabulous. But I do also think you should consider that. Like, is there something that happened on this trip that was just completely out of everybody's control and would upset anybody? Because nobody likes having to tell their boss that they're not going to be back for 3 days unexpectedly. It's awkward and it's stressful.
Exactly. And like understanding that and just kind of recapping our conversation, if you see those red flags back home, most likely they're going to be an awful travel partner. So don't even put yourself in that predicament. Don't think like, maybe if we're in a different destination, they're going to act a little bit different. Most likely not. And not every person is a good travel companion. So understand that. And, also for yourself too, maybe you're not the perfect travel companion either.
Yeah.
So, there's nothing wrong with that. You can still be really good friends with someone and just not mesh up well when it comes to traveling. So,
Yeah, for sure. Because traveling, like we said, it's a totally different environment. You're in an unfamiliar place. Stress levels are high. And some people are great friends, but they're not good travel partners. And also, it's always important to reflect. Like, are you doing something that's maybe a bit high maintenance? Like, I've had to do this like with myself, of course, because sometimes I can be high maintenance too. And it's always good to examine that. So, on a positive note, is there any one specific quality that you see in a friend and you immediately think, oh, they would make a perfect travel companion?
I mean, for me, it's just someone who's a little bit more relaxed and fun because, like, I don't want to be with someone who's like boring and dry, again, especially when I'm traveling with a group of friends, I'm taking time off from work. This is time that I could be spending with my family. So like I don't want to have a bad time. So I want to travel with someone that I feel like they're easygoing and understanding, because then that kind of just opens the door for them to be flexible to like anything, where there comes to like where do you want to eat, things you want to do. And just one thing that's a negative, at least for me, I could do that too sometimes, where I'm just like kind of go with the flow. But please have an opinion, please have an opinion. Don't just say like, whatever. That's not helpful. That is not helpful. So I always admire someone that does kind of, and we all have our strong suits. Again, like I said, when I'm traveling with my friends, we kind of share responsibilities. So maybe if I'm looking at the hotel, if my friend takes the initiative and look at restaurants or things to do, sharing those responsibilities, because then at least you're both picking things that you both want to do. But sometimes also to going with someone that is just kind of like whatever. You might think it's great, but when it comes to making decisions, it's not.
Yeah, it's always good because I can be pretty bad with this being like so go with the flow where it's like, oh, whatever. But like you said, you need to also have an opinion and come to a decision. Like if it's, say, someone gives me like, okay, like Rachel, these are the two restaurants, pick one. If like you hold my feet to the fire and say pick one, I totally will. But yeah, for me, like a good travel partner is just someone who likes to have fun and likes to enjoy the experience, because you don't want to be with somebody who's miserable and down in the dumps the whole time and complaining. Like you want somebody who's lighthearted and can actually enjoy it, because at the end of the day, you're both spending a lot of money. And like I said, I may joke about my credit cards and it being fake money or whatever. Don't come to me for financial advice. But at the same time, I know what this is costing. And if you're just like unwilling for whatever reason to have a good time, it's probably not going to be, the best fit. So just like go with an open mind, be willing to have a good time. And also, like, be honest. If there's something you really don't want to do, just be honest with me. Like, I can think of one time in Cordoba, Peg and I were walking around, and there was like some light show or something going on, and she didn't really want to do it. And she was like, hey, this isn't really my thing. Would you be opposed to going to dinner instead? And I was like, all for it. I was like, oh, yeah, that's fine. But it was good that she said something and had an opinion, like you said, because then we could pivot and do something else. So it's always good to just like make your opinion known when it comes to these things, rather than like being quiet, because then it like builds up resentment, and resentment is never a good thing.
Exactly. And it's all about compromise too. So like, if there's something that you want to do or vice versa that your friend wants to do that might not necessarily be of your interest, be flexible. Be like, okay, we'll do this. I also want to do this activity, and be open to that as well. It can't just be everything that you want to do and kind of force them, unless like you're traveling with your family. And that's what I do. I planned itineraries based on the things that I like, and then I'll sprinkle some things that they enjoy.
I do this, and then I put like the little like bug in their ear. I'll be like, you really want to do this activity, right? Of course you do. It's fun. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And usually, like, I'm lucky, like most of my friends have similar interests, so it's not, a bad thing. I will say though, when you and I travel, we do have this tendency to bring out the shopaholic in the other.
I am bad.
It's a good thing though. It's all fun, but
I'm pretty bad when it comes to that.
Me
and
too.
Then I get buyer's remorse. I always get buyer's remorse afterwards when I come back home. I was like, I really didn't need to buy every flavor Kit Kat at the store in Japan. But here we are.
No, of course you did. Don't feel bad.
I just gifted it to all my coworkers. So I was like, okay, now I feel better.
Yeah, it's like that thing I bought in New Hope. I won't say what it is because it's going to be a surprise that I'm going to give to my dad for his birthday. Because after I bought it, I was like, where am I going to even put this?
And I encouraged that purchase, so I'm a bad friend.
You did encourage that purpose, but really, like, honestly, Rosa, if you weren't there, I probably would have bought it anyway. I just think I like to shop. It's all good.
There's nothing wrong with that.
So if you know that about, your friends, like this friend may bring out the shopaholic in me or whatever, just like know that ahead of time and just budget a little more. It's all good.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's the key thing, right? One, budget. Set those expectations before you even go on the trip. Now, that's not to say that you have to kind of lay everything out like, hey, let's discuss if this scenario happens, what are you going to do? Don't be that person either. But, set up those realistic expectations. Know the things that you want to do. If your friend doesn't want to do it, have that conversation and, be understanding. If they want to do something and you don't want to do it, then maybe this is a time that you can like relax by the beach or read a book, by the pool or whatever the case is. Don't feel like, you need to be attached to your friends 24/7 throughout the trip and not compromising on the things that you definitely don't want to do. Or also, like, one good thing I want to point out is back to the budget part, overspending just to keep up. If this is a trip that is going to leave you with a financial burden, then maybe you shouldn't do it.
Totally.
Be realistic about what you can spend. And when you set those expectations ahead of time, you'll feel more comfortable because at least you're not going to be on the trip counting every single dollar that you're spending. Because one, that's not going to be enjoyable for you, and it's not going to be enjoyable for those around you either.
Totally. So, potential travel friends, if you see me over there buying that new pair of Chanel sunglasses, no pressure. You do not have to join me. You can sit back and quietly judge. I don't want you to go into debt because of my life choices. General announcement. But yeah, on that note, something that we're doing for this Greece trip. Now, granted, it's just the three of us. I think if you had like more than three people doing this, it can get a little crazy. But we do have a group chat where we're discussing activities, discussing hotels. We're going to be discussing dinner reservations. So it's nice that everybody can kind of give their input. And I do think like putting things in text is also a little less intimidating than having the conversation in person. Like, again, if you're traveling with a group of 10, a group chat's going to be a nightmare because every time you open your phone, there'll be 90 notifications. But if it's just like a few of you, it can work.
Yeah, that's a good one. And back to the budget, like, how do you deal when it comes to splitting costs?
So I've been very lucky with this because with the trip to Greece, like Peg and I have traveled quite a bit together. So I don't mind booking the stuff for the points, but she's really, really fantastic about Venmoing me immediately. So we never really have to like worry about those initial costs up front. And then honestly, granted, this is because we've traveled together before and we trust one another. We'll just like each take turns, like getting dinner, getting the museum tickets and whatnot. And then when we come back, we'll add everything up and we'll see if like one person spent more than the other. And usually like we're only maybe like $200 off. So we've kind of just like taken a chance with that, but it's always worked out very well where it all comes out in the wash. Nobody's like shortchanging the other, and it's always worked out fine. But then again, like I'm in a really lucky situation with that, and it works out. How about you?
So I had one particular experience that kind of stands out. So I went on like a weekend getaway with a couple of girls and we all went out to dinner. I'm not a big heavy drinker, but they were buying like bottles of wine. Like I think we had like four, and it was a group of us, I think six of us. And they were buying like bottles of wine left and right, and not cheap wine. And maybe I consumed maybe 3 glasses of wine throughout the whole night that we were at dinner. And when the bill came out, we all split it, and I ended up spending like over $200.
My
I was like, what the heck? All I have was like chicken and 3 glasses of wine. And I spent over 200, over $200. And again, I didn't want to be that person to be like, hey, I really didn't consume that much. I don't feel like I should be paying this much. But I also kind of felt like, a little weird about it because I was totally, totally overspending. And it wasn't like a special occasion. It wasn't like, it was like a birthday or we were just all hanging out. So like normally, obviously, like if we're all, celebrating something and we're splitting the bill, then it is what it is with that. But in this particular situation, like I was kind of like upset because I'm like, I did not consume over $200, with 3 glasses of wine and a piece of chicken that I ate. So then the following night, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be spending this amount of money. So I'm going to make sure I kind of order something similar. Everyone was getting like steak or like seafood. I was like, I'm not going to order something cheap. I'm going to order something, comparable to what everyone else is ordering. And you know what? Screw it. I'm going to have more than 3 glasses of wine because I'm going to pay for it anyways. So kind of like going into the second night, I already kind of knew, all right, this is the expectation. So now let me make sure that I am kind of like, getting what I'm spending. So in that particular scenario, I was kind of a little thrown off because again, I didn't want to be that person. I've been in groups where we've gone out to dinner and I've had those people in that group where they complain and they're like, hey, no, like this was my portion. You guys figure out the rest. But I personally don't like to be that person because I kind of feel it's like a little weird. But I then complain about it after the fact about how much money I spent.
Yeah, those situations are always so uncomfortable and they happen at home too because like, say if you don't want to drink and everybody else is ordering cocktails, it adds up really fast. Now, luckily, with my friends at home, when we've gone out to dinner, we're really good about splitting the bill and understanding, like, if somebody doesn't order drinks or maybe just one drink, then their portion of the bill is going to be less. But it's always, like you said, it's always so awkward to be that person to be like, hey, I didn't have as much, or like waving the waiter aside and being like, oh, can you bill me separately? Like, it's always just like uncomfortable. But that's rough because like I know in my head I'm like I would have said something, but if I was actually in that situation, maybe I wouldn't have because I just like I said, I'm not really good at confrontation like that.
Yeah. And I was with a group of people, like I knew two of the girls that were in the weekend getaway and stuff like that. A couple of them I didn't really know them. They were like friends of friends. So I didn't want to be like that cheap person in the group complaining about the bill. So I think also too, if it was a group of friends that I would have been more comfortable with, then I totally probably would have said something like, hey, this is my portion, I kind of would have addressed it a little bit different, but I guess I felt a little bit intimidated because it was with people that I didn't know and I didn't want to kind of be that one person who complains about splitting the bill. So again, it's contradicting. I say stand up for yourself, have those conversations, but here I am overpaying for dinner.
I know. I'm the same thing. I'll say like right here on the podcast, if I ever do that, you are welcome to call me out. Be
But
like,
yeah.
Rachel, you have had 3 causes. I'm not paying for those.
It's like fine. Like you said, sometimes I have gone on trips with friends where we're like splitting the bill evenly, even though like, it's not a big of a difference. We'll split like a bottle of wine. Maybe I'll have 2 glasses, they have 3. I don't really care, but if you are constantly with someone that they're spending their portion of the bill's 100 where yours would have been 25, that's a big difference. So kind of making sure that you feel comfortable, and again goes back to what I said before, if you are traveling with someone, making sure that you are comfortable having these open conversations. Sometimes it is uncomfortable, to be honest, but if it's a good friend, they would be fine.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's like the main lesson here is like travel with good friends and people that you don't mind having these conversations with. Because if you're traveling with someone who you may not be 100% comfortable with and they're just going insane with ordering food or whatever, and you're not like eating quite as much and they're like more away walking away with multiple free meals, like that's not the person you want to travel with.
Yeah, it's all about compromise. But I think to kind of like, recap our conversation, traveling is fun. It's supposed to be fun, right? I know for me, traveling is an escape of like my day to day. It's something that I do to decompress from my work life and everyday life. So when I do go away, I want to have fun. Things are going to happen. And every single trip, something always goes wrong. Like I have countless numbers of stories of my travel fails. That's like a great episode for another day. But, being open to having these conversations, with someone and not being a Debbie Downer. So like if like, and it's hard too because I've also been in that situation where I've gone through things in life where I'm not the most upbeat at that point in time, but I kind of recognize that and I try to put my best foot forward to make sure that I'm trying to enjoy myself. But most importantly, the friends that I'm traveling with are not being kind of bored by my sadness or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, totally. Always try to be considerate of your friends and vice versa, because at the end of the day, you're going on this trip, like you said, to escape and to have a good time and learn something new. So it's always important to try to stay positive, try to stay upbeat. And of course, things will happen, but it's how you handle them that counts. And yeah, like you said, travel is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be all this like drama about, money and what people are ordering and like activities. Like you want to travel with someone who you're on the same wavelength. You can have these conversations and have a good memory together.
Exactly. So we would love to hear what are some of your red flags when it comes to high maintenance friends. How do you deal with it? And I'm even curious to know, do you guys have any stories about any breakups that you had to do because you're just not travel compatible? So I hope you guys took away some valuable tips on this episode. And as always, make sure to follow us on social and plan your next getaway destination. We love hearing from you guys. We also have our Google form if you want to be a guest or if there's any topic that you want us to cover. This podcast is not just about travel. This is about empowering women in everyday things. So whatever it is, if you want suggestions or tips or have any questions, Rachel and I are always here to guide you as best as possible. Sometimes we might not give you the best financial advice because, as you can tell, we're a bit of shopaholics. But we will try. It'll come from a good place. So as always, friends, Bon Voyage Besties, and catch you on the next episode.